Eric, and we are recording this webinar. So those of the people that can't attend can view later. This morning, the IR team is going to present the findings of our 2022 draft integrated report. My name is Leslie Merrick. I lead the data assembly and GIS portion of the program. Today, I will be walking you through some background information. Becky Anthony, our program lead, will share the findings of our draft report. And finally, Travis Pritchard, our programming and data analyst expert, will demo the tools the team has developed to assist in review and comment on our draft report. As we go, feel free to type questions into the chat box or raise your hand. We'll either get to those as we go or kind of stop during when we switch speakers and answer questions. We should have plenty of time, so feel free to type in and raise your hand as many times as you would like. All right, I think we're ready to get started, Travis. Okay, so just a little background on integrated report and the requirements around it. So under the Clean Water Act, the federal government under EPA requires states to assess water quality and submit an integrated report to EPA every 2 years. In this report, which is actually more of a database than a written report, states must report on the overall conditions of Oregon's waters, report on water quality, impaired waters, which is also known as the 303D list, and go out for public comment on the draft findings, which is where we are today. Once public comments have been addressed, states must then submit the report to EPA for final approval. Oregon has some of its own requirements surrounding this program or report. The states must develop what's called an assessment methodology that outlines how the report will be generated, how data will be accumulated and assessed against water quality standards. About 10 years ago, the state of Oregon asked DEQ or under state statute to put out for peer review any substantive changes to that methodology. In 2018, we did that for some updates to our biocriteria methodology, and I believe a new assessment methodology where we use statistical methods to determine the status of waters. So once we've gone out for peer review, we incorporate those feedback into our methodology, and then the entire document must go out for public comment prior to assembling or assessing any data. And then the DEQ must also give an informational overview to our Environmental Quality Commission. Next slide. So the integrated report process, as I mentioned, is more of a kind of a database than than a written report. And it's a fairly extensive, long process. So it starts with developing a credible data policy and listing methodologies, which I just discussed. The credible data just kind of outlines what data the DEQ will and will not use in this evaluation of waters of the state. The team must then solicit data, ask the public for any available water quality data. So that's kind of what we call our call for data process. States must then assemble and evaluate all of the data that was assembled either through call for data, readily available data sources such as the Federal Water Quality Portal or the USGS NWIS database. We also utilize our own data and So all and informational data as well. So all that must be kind of brought together and evaluated for data quality. The process then moves into the assess phase, where we use the methodologies that we have put out for peer review and develop a draft integrated report, which we then will report out to the public as we are doing now, and then ultimately report to the EPA. So where are we currently in this process? So just a review for where we've been for this 2022 cycle. In the fall of 2020, our integrated report team presented 3 webinars to the public. These webinars outlined our methodology updates and some prioritization in how we were going to be kind of improving the process for 2022. We then put out in January of 2021 our draft assessment methodology, and for public comment, we responded to those comments. In February of 2021, we initiated our call for data. We also, during that time period, as I mentioned, compiled all readily available data and compiled our own data into one central location, where from that time to now, we have been in the process of reviewing the data and running our kind of automated R code to determine assessment categories and review informational data as well against some of our more non-numeric standards. And in April of 2022, we plan to submit our final report to EPA after responding to any comments you all may have. So just a quick review on the integrated report categories. So in this process, EPA defines 5 categories for states to place waters into. Category 1 is defined as waters meeting all beneficial uses. Oregon doesn't use this category because it's fairly rare that we will have enough data to assess against all our designated uses for a particular water. Category 2 indicates waters that are attaining standards. Category 3 indicates waters that have not enough or insufficient data. Category 3 in Oregon also has some subcategories that further define reasons we were unable to come up with a more robust categorization. And category 4 is the water is determined to be impaired, but a TMDL or other pollution plan is in place or not needed. And category 4 waters are impaired and a TMDL is needed. And these category 5 waters constitute what we call the 305 or impaired, the 303D or impaired waters list. Next slide. So just a quick overview of some of the assessment methodology updates we made for the 2022 cycle. First, we put together a more comprehensive delisting method for dissolved oxygen, and delisting is where waters once determined to be impaired are now based on a predetermined method, determined now to be attaining water quality standards. So we kind of put a more robust method for determining that, specifically for dissolved oxygen. We developed an assessment method for using continuous pH data. Previous to that, we'd only used GRAB data. We also developed a delisting method for freshwater fecal coliform We developed minimum data requirements for attainment and incorporated the new aquatic life aluminum criteria into our methods, and developed a more comprehensive way to assess what we call our watershed assessment units by station, and I'll get into that a little more in the next couple slides. So just a refresher of assessment units. So assessment units are how states report on segments of waters in this process. So in Oregon, we've developed 5 types of assessment units. We have what we call our river and stream units. These represent medium to large streams and rivers and are defined as 5th order with the strangler stream order and higher. So this kind of picture represents what we mean by strangler stream order, where smaller headwater streams have a lower order, and as streams come together, the number gets higher. So these are in Oregon meant to represent, as I said, medium to large streams. And then we have in Oregon quite a lot of water. So rather than coming up with a process where we had millions of these individual assessment units, we chose to group smaller, typically headwater streams into what we call a watershed assessment unit. And these are streams which are 4th order and smaller. So, you know, meant to be smaller streams, and they're defined at a hydrologic unit code 12 or sub-watersheds. They're kind of broken and grouped at the HUC 12 level, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. We also have water body assessment units, which are lakes, reservoirs, and estuaries. Typically, those are kind of defined as individual lakes, individual reservoirs, and estuaries are divided at changes in the bacterial indicator. So many cases where we switch from more of a saltwater marine indicator for bacteria to a freshwater. We also have coastline representing our beaches, and Oregon territorial waters, which are more areas of our ocean waters extending out to our territorial sea, which is about 3 miles offshore. So digging a little deeper into the watershed assessment units, as I mentioned, these represent smaller streams in a sub-watershed or HUC 12. So I have an example on the left here where you see the gray outline is a HUC 12. It's about 12 miles from end to end. And all the blue lines or streams in this sub-watershed are grouped as to one assessment unit. It might be a little hard to see, but in this example, we have 3 monitoring locations in green. And the way we kind of assessed these units, these watershed units in our previous cycle, was that we took data from each monitoring location and grouped it or pooled it as we would for, they are our larger river stream units. And we reported on an overall conclusion for that entire assessment unit. So if it was color coded as kind of a polygon based on the category it was determined to be. So part of the methodology update for 2022 was reevaluating, and that was based on feedback we got from the public. So next slide. So what we're doing now is understanding that these watershed units are a little different than kind of the rest of our assessment units, where it does make sense to take all the monitoring locations and kind of pool that data together. For our watershed assessment units, we are now starting at the monitoring location level and coming up with a assessment parameter conclusion for each station. We then will roll up that conclusion for each individual monitoring stations to an individual stream within the assessment unit. We determine that based on the National Hydrography Data Set has a feature called a GNIS, or Geographic Name Information System. So that's basically a stream name. So we're using those to kind of display individual conclusions for each kind of named stream where we have data. So in this example, again, we're looking at an entire watershed unit, but our new map display has some kind of added information where one stream, as being shown with the red dot in the purple dotted lines, one of the stations lower down in the watershed was determined to be impaired. So that stream is going to be depicted with the purple dotted line. In the kind of upper watershed, that station was determined to be attaining water quality standards. So we're now displaying that stream with a green dotted line, meaning attaining. So this, we can talk about it in the next slide, but we have a predetermined hierarchy to where we will report on, one impairment leads to an overall impairment at not only the stream level, but also at the assessment unit level. So you'll see now that the assessment unit is, the entire HUC 12 is colored purple because one stream or one monitoring station is impaired. But our map does display now some more detail, but the overall conclusion is still an impaired assessment unit. As I mentioned, we have a hierarchy of how we're doing this. Is category 5 is greater than category 2, which is greater than category 3 as far as how we would report those conclusions at the assessment unit level. So I think that's all I have. If we want to stop and questions now, or I think we can move on to Becky's portion.
I think we should take a minute and see if anyone has any questions on this.
Okay.
This is a big change.
Hi, Leslie. This is Megan Saunders. I had a great slide. This is one of them. Appreciate the ability to see the data, and I'm wondering if people are working on a stream that wasn't one of these two new streams, would you assume that it is impaired based on the whole watershed assessment, or would you like to take that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't really make out the full question. There's a little bit of static. Did anybody else?
Is the question whether or not, if you're working on a stream that's in a watershed unit that's considered impaired but doesn't have any data on it, whether or not we would consider that one to be impaired? Yeah, we would not consider that one to be impaired. Only where we have data on the stream that shows impairment would we consider it to be impaired.
Okay.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions?
Great.
Okay, well, I guess we can move on then. All right, so what's new in 2022? So in 2022, we incorporated more continuous data sets for more parameters. So in the previous cycle, we assessed continuous data for dissolved oxygen and temperature. And so in this cycle, we also assessed continuous pH data, like Leslie mentioned earlier with our new methodology. We also expanded the rationales for our assessment conclusions. So you can, when you use the online database, you can see more details about why the conclusions were drawn for the assessment. And like Leslie just explained, we provide more localized information on the watershed units and where the impairments occur. All right, next slide, Travis. So for the 2022 integrated report, we assessed data for the period of record from January 1st, 2016 through December 31st, 2020. And so this map kind of shows we assessed over 3,200 unique monitoring stations statewide, with over 3.5 million numeric results from grab samples, 4 million continuous results, which resulted in over 7.5 million numeric results of data that we assessed. The data that was assessed represents approximately 17% of the water statewide. And our conclusions came approximately 35% of Oregon's assessment units are considered to be impaired, which actually is just a slight increase from last cycle where it was 34%. So it just went up by a little bit. We assessed data from over 95 organizations. Most of those organizations were from the Water Quality Portal, organizations who submit data through the Water Quality Portal. 14 organizations submitted data to us through the call for data. So that was numeric data. We also assessed narrative data. We assessed advisories for harmful algal blooms, and we looked at invasive species reports from the aquatic invasive species, the invasive species hotline. All right.
Becky, can you respond to Eric's question in the chat?
Yeah, so if multiple sites on a unit, if some sites are impaired, so the impairment would trump the non-impairment. So if they are on the same stream, if there are multiple sites and some are considered impaired, that stream would be considered impaired. So it's kind of basically that hierarchy that we were talking about, that if any are on a stream are considered impaired, then that water body would be considered category 5. Okay, next slide. So our high level overview of our draft results, we had 214 new category 5 listings for the 303D list, 82 of those being temperature, 45 DO, 18 pH, and 15 bacteria, and that included E. coli and enterococci. We also had some listings for human health and aquatic life toxics, chlorophyll, turbidity, biocriteria, and HABs. All right, next slide. So the top 5 pollutants impairments in 2022 were the same as they were in 2018, 2020. Biocriteria, dissolved oxygen, E. coli, sedimentation, and temperature. And so what you can see from this graph, the dark color represents data that was not assessed in 2022, and the lighter color represents data that we assessed in 2022. So you can see that the majority of the listings are ones that have moved forward from previous cycles. Okay, next slide. So this just kind of looks at the data in a different way. So the light colored represents data that is considered to be impaired. It's not attaining water quality standards. And the dark represents attainment of water quality standards. And what strikes me with this graph is for most of them, it's fairly consistent, the attaining and the not attaining. But with regards to temperature and to a lesser degree biocriteria, there are more water bodies that are considered to be impaired than they are attaining criteria. For our metals, pesticides, and toxics, it's the other way around, where there are more water bodies that we assess that are attaining their criteria than are considered to be impaired. All right, next slide. So the new Category 5 listings in 2022, the top listings were biocriteria, dissolved oxygen, E. coli, pH, and temperature. So these were the top 5 impairments that were added for 2022. So next slide. When you put that in context, this kind of shows the integrated reports cycles when DEQ submitted integrated reports and the number of impairments by each cycle. And so what you can see by the graph is that actually in 2022, we are proposing to add the least number of impairments than we have since we started listing waters in 1998. So not only are we proposing to add waters to the list, but we're also proposing to delist waters. And so we have approximately 65 assessment unit parameters that we are proposing to delist. And actually the highest number of delistings also occur for temperature. We're also proposing to delist water bodies for bacteria, chlorophyll, pH, aquatic life and human health toxics, biocriteria, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. And as you can see by the map, the delistings aren't really centralized in a specific location, but they are spread across the state. And so I think Travis is going to talk about how we use the tools next to provide comments on the draft report. Does anybody have any questions about the results?
Great. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna discuss the tools that we've created to interact with the data and the reporting that we're doing. So in 2022 draft integrated report, we have 4 tools, and these are very similar to the 4 tools that we have available for the 2018-2020 integrated report. We have a story map that describes kind of an overview of the assessment process, as well as provide some instruction on how to provide comments and kind of what sort of comments we're looking for. We have an interactive web map application that's very similar to what was produced last cycle. However, it has been upgraded to a new system and there's some new functionality. So we'll go over that. We have an online searchable database, which is almost exactly like the 2018-2020 integrated report, if you're familiar with that. And we have a downloadable geo database. So kind of GIS savvy folks can work that into their own workflow. Before I kind of demo some of the tools, I just wanted to give an overview of how to read an assessment unit ID and AUID. So an AUID has 4 or 5 components to it. The first component is a state identifier. All of ours are Oregon. The second component right here describes what type of assessment unit it is. And now that we have a kind of different methodology for our watershed units and our other types of units, kind of this field becomes a little bit more important. So if it's a watershed unit, it'll be WS versus a stream and river, which is an SR in there. We have the third section is a HUC 10 designation, or in the case of a watershed unit, this will be the HUC 12 number. That's the watershed boundary as defined by the NHD, National Hydrography Dataset. We have section 4, which is beneficial use code, which is more of an internal code for us that lets us know which beneficial uses apply at that assessment unit. So I don't imagine many people outside of the assessment team are really going to use that. And then this 5th section here is a 6-digit unique identifier, which is unique. And so if you don't want to, if you want to talk about an AUID and you don't want to use this whole big long thing, you can just go ahead and use these 6-digit identifier here. I'm going to stop my sharing and we're going to do a live demo. So let's hope that our technology is working today. How do I reshare? Is that working? Can you guys see my web browser here? Okay, so DEQ has recently redid how the website is organized. So I'm going to give you guys the secret tip of what's the fastest way to get to the integrated report is you type in Google Oregon DEQ integrated report, and then it comes up on this first link right here. So that's the real secret way of how to get there. So now if you want to see the draft report, you click on the assessment, and it's right here, draft integrated report. The current 2018-2020, which is the report that's in effect, is here, but we're talking about the draft integrated report right now. So we click on there. So here we have the 4 tools. We have comments can be submitted to integrated report at deq.oregon.gov. This is the email address that folks are going to use to submit their comments to us. And we have until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 11th. So the 4 tools we have here are an interactive story map. You click here. I've already preloaded it up. So this story map walk users through the review process. I'm not going to go over it too much in depth. You folks can go ahead and read it. But we have, again, in here, we have that same email address of where to submit comments to it, as well as an overview of assessment units, as well as how, kind of reiterating what Leslie was talking about of how we review non-watershed assessment units and how we review watershed assessment units, and kind of what the difference between those 2 components are. Additionally, we have, this is our new web map. I've also preloaded here. This is what it looks like this time. Hopefully it looks a little bit cleaner and a little bit more user-friendly than the GeoCortex application we were using before. Over here, it comes the layers that you can turn on and off show up here, and you can kind of toggle that on and off there and there. So if you want to see the report, if you wanted to just kind of explore around, you can come in, you can click on an assessment unit, and I'll tell you what the status is. This one is 10389. It's attaining. We had new data that we assessed this cycle for that assessment unit, and it's attaining for all of these parameters that we assessed with some insufficient parameters here. If you wanted to just see, here, let me show you that here's a watershed unit, and these are these dotted lines that Leslie was talking about. So within this watershed unit, you can click on the whole watershed unit. It's impaired, and it's impaired for against the temperature year-round standard. But if you wanted to explore a little bit more, here is this specific line within that Anderson Creek. It is actually attaining the standard, whereas here Boulder Creek is impaired for that criteria. So we're trying to provide a lot more information here and a lot more detailed. That was the feedback we got from the public for the 2018-2020 is just needing more information. So we tried to do that there. To turn on and off the layers, if you go here, you can turn all the layers off. And if you wanted to just see the impaired waters, you can turn all these layers on, and this will kind of get rid of those polygons and just really outline what waters we are considering impaired in the state. And hopefully for those folks who are more involved in water management actions, this is kind of a cleaner, more appropriate way of looking at what we considered impaired. And again, we have pop-up boxes that show, this assessment unit is impaired for dissolved oxygen in the spawning period, as well as by criteria and temperature against the year-round criteria. We also have the delisting. This is the map that Becky showed. Again, more pop-ups here. So this is the Metolius, and we are delisting it. It's no longer, we're removing the temperature, year-round temperature impairment, which makes a lot of sense for the Metolius River for us to do. And then if you wanted, and then down here, we have some more that kind of ancillary data outside of the integrated report specific. We have a, turn this off and we can turn this one on. Here's all of our assessment units. If you wanted to know kind of which assessment units, you know, if folks are working in a water body and they want to know what's the assessment unit associated with that, we have that layer here, as well as very similar to the 2018-2020 map. Once you zoom in on this, the water quality standards will eventually show up. And there's a lot more functionality in here than before. If you click this little eye here, we get a lot of information about kind of how to use the map. This is a abbreviated version. On the website, we have a pretty detailed map instructions for how to use the new web map, describing kind of how to get some tables and how to do some searches and how to turn on and off layers. And we have a condensed abbreviated version here in this eye. One thing that I have been finding handy, turn this back on, is you can actually bookmark a view. So if you want to, you know, kind of come here into here and you could, I'm sorry, bookmark a view, you can add a bookmark. And then this actually persists when you come back in. If you want to zoom in into a certain area, you can go ahead and click on that. So this is the web map. We have additionally the online searchable database, which if you click here, it takes you to the database. And for folks who have reviewed or interacted with the 2018-2020 integrated report, this will look very familiar. You can search for an assessment unit, click on filter, and it'll come up with you know, assessment unit ID, name, whether we assess it in 2022, and kind of one of the things that we tried to really make more explicit, as Becky was saying, is our rationale for why it got the conclusion that it did. So if we assess in 2022, this rationale should be fairly comprehensive. So in this case, this one is 102.838. This watershed unit is impaired for E. coli because at this station, the geo means exceeded the criteria value during these times. And again, we can, just like the previous ones, we can, if you want to look at just certain pollutants, or if you want to look at certain basins, or you want to look at certain statuses, we can do that here. Additionally, by clicking up here, we can download the raw data that was used in the assessment. So if people wanted to see the data itself behind those assessments, that is available from here.
Hey, Travis, we have a couple of questions so far. If you want to pause in the chat.
Really see the chat button. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Do you want to read the question and then answer it?
Sure. Wade, remind. Oh no, that was just to me. Okay. What is the difference between dashed and solid lines for impaired waters? Well, let's turn on. If we turn on this layer, we can see. So the dashed lines. Here's a good example. The solid lines are. Let's get to the solid line itself. The solid lines are the river and stream units. So in this case, this is Deer Creek. This assessment unit 104047 reaches from, you know, this point down to this pop-up box is kind of in the way, this point here. So this is a river and stream unit. So our river and stream units are assessed completely independently of the watershed units that they're contained in. So we look at data for this river stream unit and we assess it. And then we look at data for the watershed unit and we assess it independently. So what the dashed lines represent are the assessment conclusions that we've made for those GNIS lines within the watershed unit itself. So this dashed line right here is Doobie Creek. It's within this watershed unit. Some watershed units have one dash line, others have multiple dash lines with multiple conclusions on them. But the difference in the dash and the dotted is solid are assessment units themselves, whether they're rivers or streams or coastlines, and the dashed are watershed unit specific.
We have a couple more questions.
Mhm.
Yeah, Julia Kratz says, do you have to refilter by assessment unit to download the individual data from here? And the answer is yes, you do. So this kind of search field right here is independent. These are two kind of independent pages. So if you wanted to download data by unit, you would have to re-enter these in and then click this download data by unit, and this will download all the data that was contained in the units in the box. Megan Saunders says, are watershed units displayed differently from other assessment units in the database? And the answer is, in the database, no. So the database, they're searched for, they are by assessment unit themselves. So we wanted to pull up a watershed unit. Let's do this one here. You can see we have 103,476. This watershed unit is impaired with the TMDL. It's got two different stations, and you see in the rationale, since we did assess those independently, we have rationales for both of those stations there. So UMATNF -024 was impaired, but 025 was shown to be insufficient data. The whole watershed unit was impaired based off of from here. I don't know if that answers the question, but we don't really, in the database itself is more by assessment unit ID, whereas it's in the map that we have the more detailed analysis of, or display rather, of kind of where those impairments are considered.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Travis, that on the map, they'd be able to look at that individual watershed unit, but then see what those monitoring stations, what streams they are actually on, to see which ones are considered to be impaired. Yeah.
In this kind of thin watershed unit right here, this is the line that's considered impaired, and then it is 024. This is where that impairment was, and this one had insufficient data. Okay, I got kind of lost in where I was at.
I was also going to mention, Travis, that you can have kind of a solid impaired line going through a attaining watershed unit. If you want to show an example of that, that's sometimes can be a little confusing.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You can have an impaired solid river stream line going through an attaining, yeah, like that example.
Here's a good example. So this is a watershed unit that we did not, you can see we did not assess any new data in 2022 for this unit, but this unit itself is attaining for this very long list of parameters here. However, through it, we have this Bashaw Creek, which is impaired for E. coli, but this is an example of how we assess the watershed units completely independently from the river stream units that run with it.
One more question in the chat, Travis, about, yeah.
Our watershed assessment units coded WS, queried by assessment units, but only receive LK or SR. Where, yes, the answer is yes, they are coded with WS. I'm not sure where you're querying in there. If you, from this database, you could definitely, if you type WS, you'll get all the assessment units. I don't know if you're talking about the map itself. I'm not really clear how the queries work in the map quite yet. So I'm not quite sure, Julia, what it is that you're querying.
Hi, this is Julia. I queried by the Tualatin River Huck 8 code, and then just kind of clicked all of the assessment units that came up that had the Huck 8 code in them. But I missed the watershed units somehow.
In this database?
In that field right there. Yep. And then,
so give me what's your let's just do it live. What's your 8?
Okay, let me look it up. I don't know ours off the top of my head. 17090010. So I thought I just
keep scrolling down.
all of those.
Just keep scrolling down, and here they are.
Okay,
So here's one Lower Rock Creek, assessed 2022. Here's the parameter category. Here's the pollutant. Here's the rationales for why we got those.
so if I want all the Tualatin Basin, I need to click on all of those assessment units.
Yeah, we have by OWRD admin basin, but we don't have by kind of Huck in there, which I think is something that we are going to be adding in the future, but that functionality does not currently exist. You could just go ahead and if you were to filter everything, you could download, with nothing in there, that'll get you everything. And then you could download that into an Excel document, and then you can do some searching from there, or you can load up the geo database. There's a couple different ways, but we don't currently have a Huck filter in this tool quite yet. And then also, like we said, we have a geo database. I'm not going to click on this because it loads up a very large file to download, but you could download the geo database here. Additionally, we have some other components that are important for what's going to be our submittal to the EPA. We have our TMDL priority rankings, which list up all of the category 5 parameters, the impaired parameters that don't yet have TMDLs or other management plans to address those pollutants, and how DEQ prioritizes the TMDL development. We have our draft 303D list or combined list. We have a spreadsheet of our proposed delistings, as well as a write-up of our narrative data assessments, which is primarily ocean hypoxia and a couple more like weeds, aquatic weeds, and other kind of more narrative assessments. Oh, and here's a marine dissolved oxygen assessment, as well as fact sheet, frequently asked questions, and instructions here. And again, I just want to reiterate, comments can be submitted to this email address right here by Friday, February 11th, 2022. So does anybody have, before I kind of move off of the tools, does anyone have any questions? Geodatabase, what is the difference in GNS final and AU final?
I can take that one. GNS final is the category for the stream within a watershed, and the AU final is the category of the overarching AU. So that should just be attributes of watershed unit. Conclusions. I do plan to kind of put together a data dictionary for that geodatabase. Sorry, that is not available yet, but I will work on that this week and get that posted to the website.
So here's an example of how we could have GNISs with different categorizations, but the assessment unit itself is as a status of impaired. Stop sharing, and we're going to go back to the okay, so here's a link to the website, but like I said, the easiest place to get to it is through Google. After our reorganization, we are in a 30-day comment period, which closes on Friday, February 11th, 2022 at 5 p.m. And that email address again of where we want comments submitted to us is integrated report@deq.oregon.gov. We have one more slide. It just says questions, but I'm going to leave this slide up so that if people want to write down, type, memorize that email address, I'm just going to leave it up there. And now I think that's it for what we have for presentation. And I think we just want to kind of open it up for kind of questions until it gets awkward. Brenda says added functionality of more information. Yeah, thank you. The new mapping tool is a direct result of some of the frustrations and comments that we heard from external partners in our last cycle. So no, we're always listening and we're always trying to do better. Raj has his hand up.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Raj Kapoor with the Clean Water Services. Thanks again for this webinar. It's very, very helpful. I think you guys have brought the integrated report a long ways from where things were a few years ago. So great job.
Thank you.
Hey, so I think Julia has already noted some of the things that we were looking at, and looks like they are already on your list in terms of future functionality, being able to get data based on HUCs. I had a more specific question. In looking at some of the listings, there's several listings for dissolved oxygen based on spawning criteria, and I believe they're based on resident fish species, spawning for resident fish rather than the migrating salmonids. This is a conversation that we've had over the years about the application of spawning criteria more broadly, where spawning doesn't necessarily occur. I was wondering what DEQ is doing in terms of getting better data to apply that criteria such that we don't have listings for parameters in water bodies where that use is really not supported.
Yeah, I can take that one. So right now we're currently undergoing an aquatic life use update. Our standards unit is working with a technical advisory group, and they are working with ODFW to update the fish use maps and apply updated spawning criteria where they're applicable. And so I believe that they are striving for a rulemaking in November of 2022 to have updated criteria with regards to, I believe, both dissolved oxygen and temperature.
So Becky, once that's done, what would the delisting process look like? Would it be a straightforward delisting process saying that this particular use, is not really something that's applicable in this particular segment, or is it a more cumbersome process?
As far as I know, it should be fairly straightforward because we're just assessing the designated use that are applicable. So if those uses are no longer applicable, then it would be a straight delisting that they were attaining the criteria. So as far as I know, it should be a fairly straightforward process.
Yeah, I believe that's one of the few reasons that we can delist something is
Yeah,
like directly showing data is showing that the beneficial use doesn't apply, so we can delist just based on the beneficial use change.
Yeah, and EPA has to approve this standards change in order for us to be able to assess it that way.
Yeah, so in this report, what Becky showed was our delistings based on data now attaining, but we do have maybe fair amount where we cleaned up some old listings. We always are kind of in the process of reviewing older listings for ones that were listed, and it wouldn't be kind of error. It would be, like mentioned, more of a updated criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Yeah, the first technical advisory meeting for this use update is later this month. Got another geodatabase question.
Why are not all the HUC-12s listed in AU watershed area status? I'm going to let Les answer that, but I suspect we have only HUC-12s that we have data for.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess.
That would be my guess as well. So if the question is, we have over 3,000 Huck 12s in Oregon, why are they not all included in that status? It would be because we did not have data for each Huck 12. So rather than putting all of the unassessed in, I just kind of filtered out to where we have assessment conclusions.
So it'd be
But if there is a Huck 12 that you're not finding, it would most likely be in the unassessed category.
all of these non-shaded polygons.
Yeah, and if you turn on assessment unit, the kind of watershed areas, that'll show outlines of all the unassessed Huck 12s. So as I mentioned, there's, you know, upwards of 3,500 in Oregon. I think we have data for maybe a third of those.
Yeah. I think 41% of water bodies statewide, but like a third of, I think, watershed area hugs.
So hopefully that answers that question.
Any other questions?
Great.
All right. Well, I guess if anybody has questions, comments are due Friday, February 11th. If they have questions, just email integrated report at deq.oregon.gov and one of us will get back to you to help answer your questions. Is there anything else?
Our contact information is also on the website.
Yeah.
I think you all covered it. You did great. It looks like everyone is signed up for our opt-in Gov delivery notifications. You can do that at DEQ's website. If you or someone you know is not on our opt-in email notification system, so I want to plug for that, which is probably how you all found out about this webinar. And I'm Michelle Martin. I'm a project manager, and I'm just supporting these awesome folks doing some really good work. So we really appreciate everybody being on the call.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.